It all happened when I was 16. I think my parents were having a rough patch because every single day for a week, they sent me away with some cash to spend. Carnival was in town and I felt I was too old for it. So for the first few days, I spent all of my money at the local arcade. Unfortunately, it was like 102 degrees outside, and that old building didn't have an AC unit. And on the third day, I was about ready to melt. I was tempted to ask my parents for a little more cash so that I could use public transport to the next town and maybe go to the water park. Considering how things were going and how much money they were giving to me every day, my mom called me an ingrate and gave me carnival tickets the next day. Well, to punish me, really. I didn't want to go. I had like maybe $40 left of what they had given me, and it was still super hot outside. I remember lying in bed in the middle of the afternoon, thinking that my parents should have invested in a pool. The next day, I was given a bit more money, but it still wasn't enough for me to go to the next town and be able to enjoy the water park all day. I would run out of money for food and other activities since the entrance fee alone was about $40. Carnivals, well, they're much more fun if you go in a group, but I'm a bit of a loner. Outside of Sarah, I have 2 other friends, and, well, they're basement dwellers. They didn't even want to join me at the arcades, even though I told them I would pay for a few games. They told me about the AC and a game event, but before the end of their sentence, I knew it was a no. I mean, these guys were pretty nice to hang with at school, but summer activities? It would have had to been Xbox Live or they wouldn't be interested. Or maybe if I got into Dungeons and Dragons, I could play with them. I'm unfortunately not much of a creative guy, and also pretty much an instant gratification kind of guy. See, games like Dungeons and Dragons, they just don't reward me fast enough to keep my interest. Though I do like RPGs. I wish I had a creative bone to humor these kind of games, but I definitely don't. Which is why I decided to give a try to the carnival still, even if I was going alone. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'd find something interesting to do over there. I even thought that I could try my hand at winning one of those huge plushies and give it to Sarah. She's a childhood friend on whom I may or may not have had a crush on at the time. For all I knew, this carnival wasn't as bad as the others. I just hoped that they had more than a big wheel and some slow butterfly attraction where you sit in a tin can, lift in the air, and turn around for like 2 minutes. A roller coaster would have been nice. And so with that in mind, I made my way to the carnival, full of the hope a 16-year-old boy can have. I spent the first half of my day running around from stand to stand, using the dozen free tries I won by being the 50th to pass the gate. I unfortunately could not win Sarah any toy beside a cheap small frog, which was tiny enough to fit in one of my back pockets. Dinner time came, and I ate a traditional fare meal, hot dogs, cheese curds, and a large soda. I then spent a portion of my afternoon trying attractions, such as the big wheel and those butterflies I mentioned earlier. They were just as uninteresting as I thought they'd be. But at least I wasn't spending my day at home moping around. I enjoyed the haunted house as well. It was a bit childish, but I jumped at the end where they made a fake bat fall 2 inches away from my face. I guess it was props on them for that, I guess. It was about 3 in the afternoon when I decided I had had enough. I still had some money left, so I decided to spend it on some good old warm peanuts. The smell was absolutely fantastic, and I instantly knew I needed to taste them. And by God, these were the most flavorful, delicious peanuts I'd ever had in my little life. I mean, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that they completely changed my life. You never go at a carnival and eat peanuts thinking that your life is going to be turned upside down, but damn, those peanuts, they were the most delicious, crunchiest sweet treat I've ever tasted. So it wasn't surprising that I ate through a whole bag and then spent what little money I had left to get another bag. And when I went home after that, even my mom's dinner seemed plain in comparison with those peanuts. When I tried to fall asleep that night, my last thoughts also went to the peanuts I got from that carny vendor. Would anybody be surprised if I said I wanted to go back the next day? I got about $20 from my mom to leave the house. I didn't bother telling her where I was going. I complained so much about the carnival that if I told her I was returning there, well, she probably wouldn't let me live it down. Now, of course, I couldn't just go to the carnival and eat peanuts and then come back, so I decided to try at least to spend half the day there. And luck was on my side this time, and I won a bunch of stuff. I had to return home in the afternoon to put some gifts for Sarah aside before returning to the carnival. And my mom gave me the side eye, and I did my best to ignore it. I wanted to get back to the fair before it closed, and while I knew I had time, I didn't want to miss the peanut vendor. Some vendors leave around 6 or 7 when dinner is over, and I desperately wanted another bag of peanuts. Now, I should probably mention that those peanuts didn't taste like ordinary peanuts at all. Sure, you could taste a faint taste of salty, warm peanuts, but what really made them special was the slight crunchy coating around them. It was thin, sweetened perfectly, and I honestly wouldn't have guessed what kind of layer it was. So I decided to try and find out the brand the vendor was buying. All I had to do was stay after the carnival to try and figure out where the peanut vendor got his stock. I made it back to the carnival just in the nick of time and managed to hide myself near one of the public toilets. In my position, I could keep an eye on the vendor without risking being seen. I felt like a ninja or some sort of spy. I was lucky enough that he stayed until the closing time, so when the crowds were pushed out of the fairground, all I had to do was follow the vendor to see where he got his peanuts. My plan was genius, until I realized that the vendor's place was just a small caravan parked next to the fair. Like most of the employees, it seemed logical. If they were a traveling circus, it was only natural that they'd live in one of these campers. I thought about giving up 20 minutes into observing the camper. It was about 9:30 p.m. when the vendor got out of his camper and into a small, shoddy shack built next to it. He picked up a huge jute bag with what I assumed was peanuts, and I heard my stomach growl, and like a predator on the prowl, I sneakily made my way to the camper. The closer I got, the more the smell of worn peanuts filled the air. I could not resist it. That scent had me craving those treats more than anything in life. Given that I was still a teen, this was the first addiction I ever had, and so I snuck closer and closer to the camper. And then I heard a voice, so I dropped on the ground and crawled under the camper instead. It was cold as hell under there, and so I wondered if the guy had an AC unit running inside or something. I felt like I was hiding right under a freezer. Then I saw a pair of clown shoes walk past me, and the employees muttering about some brat who threw up in the big wheel and how that was a problem. I waited until the words were distant enough before I wiggled my way out. Then I heard it. The sound of something being chopped. Like when my mom cuts carrots for pot roasts. It was the sound of a blade slicing quickly through something hard before hitting the cutting board underneath it. Then a long, muffled sigh. It was hard to tell with the sound of the AC unit drowning out everything around me. I decided to try and watch through a window in the back, and maybe I'd be lucky enough to see the brand on the big bag. I walked around the camper and got to the windows, but he had the curtains drawn on them. seemed like I was running out of luck. And then, "Who the hell are you?" I heard a voice behind me and I froze. Head to toe, hair standing on end, and prickles of ice rushing through my system. The whole terrifying shebang because I got caught with my hand in the bag trying to stare through some old dude's window. "I can explain." However, I couldn't explain. The man grabbed me by the shoulder, and I expected him to call the cops. But instead, he walked around the camper and slammed his fist on the peanut vendor's door. He screamed the man's name until he opened the door and promptly shoved me at him. I scraped my knees against the small 3 steps leading inside the place. I was terrified I was going to get my ass beat, and the cops called on me. That was until the man said something that somehow made me feel like cops were the least of my worries. "You let one escape," the man muttered and shoved me inside unceremoniously. I felt the vendor's hand on my shoulder as he pulled me in and closed the door. I really just cannot express in words how terrified I was. What did the man mean by that? I turned my head to stare at the vendor, but the first thing I noticed was the bag of peanuts in the corner. No brand visible. As my eyes traveled upward to meet the carny's vendor's gaze, they stopped on something. It wasn't an air conditioning unit. With the freezer door wide open, I now knew why it felt so cold under that camper. About a quarter of the camper had been turned into a freezer, and hanging from a hook in the middle of it was the body of the missing child I'd seen on a poster a few days prior. The kid couldn't be older than 7, and there was already half of his body missing. I was rooted in my spot as the smell of warm peanuts invaded my nostrils and made me salivate. I swallowed thickly, still trying to figure out the link between the peanut vendor, the missing children, and what I was seeing. My eyes moved back to the tiny counter in the camper. There was the man's tools, a large butcher knife, and half of the kid's arm. The fingers had been chopped and put aside. A small, very sharp-looking knife was lying next to the rest of the arm. And I don't know why I didn't get sick right then and there. This was nothing short of a very traumatic moment. There might not have been blood anywhere, but by God, there was a body of a child hooked in a freezer, and half of its arm was on the counter, being sliced by the vendor butcher. He kept staring at me as I tried to process everything. Should I try to run? He wasn't even asking me what I was doing here. He was just staring at me with ice-cold blue eyes behind his thick white caterpillar-like eyebrows. My stomach churned and then growled. The man didn't say a word. He even looked around, and I watched him as he sliced the thinnest piece of skin off the arm, then threw it into a simmering cauldron on the small oven. It smelled like sugar cane. After about 10 seconds, he fetched the piece of skin from the pot, laid it out on the cutting board, and dropped a single peanut on it. Very delicately, he rolled the skin around the peanut and cut the excess so he could use the skin to coat another peanut. The small oven bell went off, and he picked his oven mitts, and then, without a single look of worry on his face, he dropped a plate full of those delicious peanuts in front of me. Well, the smell was nothing short of heavenly. But my eyes couldn't stop moving between the man, the arm on the counter, the body of the child in the freezer, and those delicious peanuts. My stomach growled again. I could not understand why. Despite the intense fear I was feeling, I was still hungry and still craved those delicious nuts. I should have been disgusted. I should have tried to run with my life and hope for the best, but I did not. I saw myself reach out to them, grab a handful, and shove them in my mouth. The vendor asked me if I liked them, and as I reached to grab another handful, I nodded. They're delicious. They were even better than those you bought reheated in the carnival. These peanuts changed my life forever. Anyway, I'd really like to tell you more about the old man and his peanuts, but I have to get back to work now. You see, there are hungry carnival goers to feed, and I have a ton of warm, crunchy sweet peanuts for them.